Because we were capturing so much data about the workplace, so much data that creates reports and insights that people like to read, people want to know. What are the 5 main reasons that people quit their job? What are the 5 things a manager can do to give feedback? What are the 5 things? We would use this data, we would write articles, we'd write blog posts, we'd write research pieces. And so we built this inbound content engine at a time 10 years ago before every company started doing that.
I like to start these things off. I think it's always helpful to have a little bit of context. And I love hearing kind of the elevator pitch from the founder. So in your own words, what is Quantum Workplace and what do you guys do?
I appreciate that. Thanks, Jake. And thanks for inviting me to come and talk about the story. Where, as I said to somebody in networking, we are a 20-year-old startup. I still identify as a startup. I still feel like we're scrappy and agile. Hopefully that's still true and not just in my head. But Quantum Workplace is a software as a service application for HR to do voice of the employee research, to do performance management administration. It is helping HR teams get very proactive about culture in a world where the entire C-suite is thinking about employee engagement, employee retention. It's not just a nice to have anymore. It's an absolute must have because every company, not just Silicon Valley tech or big professional services, every industry, every company is in the talent business, and our ability to attract, engage, and retain people is the name of the game, not just for HR, but for all of the C-suite. So that's what Quantum Workplace does. It helps employers get smart about voice of the employee, about aggregating the collective intelligence of their people, and then taking action on that.
Awesome. So in terms of scale, like how many employees do you guys have? Kind of where are you at right now today?
We're at 147 people. I say 150 sometimes, but this is a room full of entrepreneurs, and so I'll be precise. And in some cases, engineers, I'll be precise. You know, in the early days, we were at 10, and we might have been at 3. You just kind of round up a little bit, but we're at 147 people. We are organically grown for 20 years, and we are based here in Omaha. Right now, 60% of our people are in Omaha, 40% are remote. And that's, like a lot of our workplaces, probably a very different ratio than maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Awesome. How do you feel about the remote work? Is that something that you guys always had implemented throughout the years, or is that kind of relative new?
We've always been equipped to work remote. We've always had satellite offices around the country. We've always thought of ourselves as a flexible workplace. But 3 or 4 years ago, flexibility meant you don't have to clock in and clock out. If you want to take off early to hit your kids' Christmas program, you do that and you don't ask any questions. That's what flexibility used to be. Today, flexibility is you're going to work this month in Costa Rica. Okay, that sounds awesome. Let me know how that goes. Or you're going to come into the office on Mondays and Fridays. So what I do know is that December of 2019, we were at 90 people. We were maxed out in our office space out on West 144th Street, and looking to add or to double up our space in the building. What I know now is that this hybrid concept that we've adopted, we have the same space, and it looks half empty most of the time, but it's working for us, and
Awesome.
It just forces managers, and we have to encourage managers to be a little bit more intentional about how to stay in touch and how to create excitement and how to be visible and keep their finger on the pulse of their teams.
Yeah, as a company that's focused on culture, I imagine intentionality is kind of baked into the equation for you guys. So if we let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, 20 years or thereabouts. What was kind of the beginning stages of this idea? Were you always in like a company culture kind of space in that industry, or was this kind of a shot out of left field?
It's very logical and linear in my mind. As I describe it, it won't sound either of those two things. I In college, I studied leadership. When I say I studied leadership, who knows take a guess at what my degree is in?
Psychology?
Good guess. Close.
Business
Interesting. Political science. As a college kid, I wanted to study leadership, and my perception of leadership seemed to be that leaders were elected officials. It took me probably getting out of college before I started getting a little more jaded about that. I don't see anybody here that might hold a public office, so we can speak freely. We haven't hit record yet. Oh, we have.
Yeah.
So I wanted to study leadership. I got a poli-sci degree. I wanted to go to law school. And through a series, there's the long form of the story and there's the short form. And I'll give you maybe the short plus the medium length version. But I went from studying social sciences to investment management. And it was in investment management where I took no business in college, but I started getting really excited about markets and about the impact and the correlation between talent and economics. So this is before we used to use words like behavioral economics. That wasn't really a field of study, at least we didn't call it that. But with 4-ish years in investment management, what I was really, the idea that kept coming to me was, as analysts, as investment managers, people that buy and sell public stocks, we always talk about management. We say we love the management at Microsoft. We don't like the management at Disney. We love the management at Cisco Systems. We're questionable about, but we use the term management. We don't really have a metric. We don't even really have an evaluated description of what that means. Now, this goes back 1999, 2000. This is before something called Reg FD happened, where you weren't really supposed to have, analysts weren't supposed to have direct access, or aren't today, but before could. So I kept asking after every series of quarterly earnings calls, I kept asking, why don't we start asking questions about how companies are training their people, how they are capturing feedback about employees' perception of managers, because that seemed to be stuff, a company's ability to engage people and to retain the best talent, the best engineers. If I was analyzing tech firms, was a very good predictive quality of a future performance, as opposed to just looking at the 10Q from last quarter and figuring out from an accounting perspective who's doing best. To me, that was rear view. That was the idea. Now, whenever I would ask that question, people would look at me kind of funny, like, no, we like to study accounting documents. But it's even at that time, like this was at a time when I meant, talent was leaving Sun Microsystems and going to Cisco Systems. This was back when companies bought their own servers and put them in rooms in the basement. And that should have been a tell. Cisco Systems then went on a 400 or 500% stock climb in 1999, 2000, 2001. That should have been a tell of what was happening if all the best engineers were going from one company to the next. So that's what I wanted to do. And I actually went internally with the brokerage firms that I was with to say, hey, I think we should create a filter. I think we should start capturing data that measures this thing called human capital metrics, percent of revenue invested in training, employee retention, employee engagement, manager effectiveness scores. I wanted to create that data, capture that data, analyze that data, and sell it to Wall Street. And we got half of that equation right.
Interesting.
As we were capturing that data, we built the assessment, this was in 2001, 2002. This was before SurveyMonkey, or at a time when SurveyMonkey was 2 people in Seattle in the basement. So even running employee surveys through digital was innovation. It was novel. Gallup, a competitive firm that also is based here in Omaha, that is down on the river, had printing presses in their building, sending out thousands of paper surveys and pencils and capturing that data. So we wanted to capture human capital metrics, measure it, sell it to Wall Street. We got half of that equation right. Never really found a buyer for the data in the investment community. So we pivoted into a software play, turned the usernames and passwords over to the HR players that were helping us collect the data and let them analyze the data.
That's interesting. So it must have been semi well received internally. I mean, you took the idea internal. Did you initially start by building out some technology, or was this like, are we running on Excel spreadsheets at this point? Kind of what did it look like?
I wasn't going to tell this part of the story because I started pitching it internally. We didn't get a big reception there. And all of a sudden, building writing the business plan. 2001 happens. September 11th, 2001 happens. Market is closed for 5 days. Reopens on the 17th of September. Absolutely crashes, and the recession follows. The brokerage industry wasn't super excited about new innovative ideas at that time, and that forced me into pursuing the startup. It's kind of like being a kid and going up with a high dive, and you want to dive off the board for the first time. I'm the first time entrepreneur. I want to do a really beautiful dive into the water from the high dive, but instead of like you're crafting your plan, you're getting ready. You weren't sure what the timing was. You have a job. You had some early success in your first 4 years in that job, and then a parent comes up behind you on the board and just kind of kicks you off. James, has that ever happened to you? Has your dad ever just shoved you off the diving board? That's what our startup story. So I had the business plan. I didn't have a lot of reception internal. I started going to other firms, which is kind of a weird thing to do and probably stirred up some emotion with the employers. So broke ways with them. Started off on a path. Actually, my very first concept was another investment firm and a partnership, a JV that I was trying to pitch to said firm on an unnamed river in Omaha, thinking that we could create a JV between these two firms, and that didn't work. So I said, if this is going to happen, it's going to happen on me. And so I started drawing pictures and making calls from my basement in late 2002.
Awesome. So I kind of want to get into like the company culture piece just a little bit. It sounds like today it's very commonplace to talk about company culture. How are we going to drive engagement and have the best employees come to work for us? And I imagine in 2002 it wasn't very commonplace. So how was that initial sales process? It had to have been an uphill battle.
It was an uphill battle for most industries in 2002, 2003. But there were still professional services firms. There were still technology firms. This is a time where Accenture would talk about their culture, and they would describe green M&Ms. Has anybody ever heard the green M&M story from Accenture? I've just dated myself as the oldest person.
You're gonna have to tell it now.
Fortune magazine runs an article. I don't know, maybe it's 1999, 2000. And when asked from Accenture, this isn't even Accenture. This is the predecessor to Accenture, Arthur Andersen. Is that right? And when describing the culture there, we're a performance-oriented culture, and every time one of our producers sells a big deal, in every single office across the entire globe, we put out a jar of green M&Ms. That denotes, we do that before making an announcement, we do that before getting press releases. Everybody knows that the green M&Ms are on the table. This is success. And this was people's view of culture. So there were pockets of industry that understood culture, but they were mostly professional services firms. They were mostly technology firms whose key asset started at 8 and left at 5. That went home every single night. That was just a few industries 20 years ago. Today, even banks or real estate firms or manufacturing firms believe that their ability to attract and engage, that their people are their greatest asset. In some industries, some companies probably still are better at saying it than executing it on, but at least they're saying it and giving intellectual assent to the idea that talent, everybody is in the talent game.
Yeah. All I can think about is how many green M&Ms that would be. It's like
a special
just
deal with
bowls
Hershey,
of
a special
green
manufacturing
M&Ms everywhere
partnership
in the world.
with Hershey's.
Yes. So as you're going, and you have this idea, you're going to kind of shop it around. Do you have any technology at that time? I mean, were you sitting on something that looked beautiful and you're ready to show to customers? Were you excited about what you had?
I was really excited about what we had. Was it beautiful? No, it was a couple for, and I say a couple, that's probably rounding up from one, contract developers that wrote up some ASP pages at a time where I'm not even sure if I really knew what that was, but it felt like real technology to me to capture data, to run surveys and capture data. We didn't have the analytics engine yet. We didn't have the scale was going to be an issue. It was our second customer that said yes, that we went from, capturing a couple hundred surveys, which is probably 5 to 10,000 units of data versus a factor of 10 or 15 times that. And on our second customer, we were having scale issues. So at the time, I thought the answer to that question was yes. I talked about it like it was sliced bread, but it was definitely each month that passed, and the technology was advancing, and I was realizing that we were getting traction. We were going to have to get more serious about architecture, more serious about the language that we were coding in.
Yeah.
But I was not an engineer. And
was that your first hire? Was it engineering or was it something different?
it was a first. So part of our founding story is an interesting component where, as I was out looking for angel investment, looking for partners, looking for angel investment, I talked to a contact who put me in touch with a gentleman in Kansas City. That gentleman in Kansas City had just started a similar conversation with an entrepreneur in Wichita who wanted to build an online survey form for aircraft manufacturers. That sounds really niche and really narrow, but it was actually an interesting idea. Again, playing on the idea that taking something that was very paper, very administrative intensive, and digitizing it. After a couple weeks of pitching, angel investor in Kansas City, he says, "Hey, I'm talking to this company in Wichita. You really are two business plans that may or may not have a business yet, but have a couple customers. You two should join forces, and I'll help get you up off the ground financially." That was 2000. That was March of 2003. The reason that's an answer to the question is that gentleman had a software developer in Colorado Springs, and they were 6 months ahead of me on the technology. They actually had the reporting engine that shows and visualizes the data in a way much more meaningful than I had, and that's what sent us off to the races.
Interesting. So you joined forces.
Yeah.
The two companies did. So essentially, you went out looking for investment, and you found a business partner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It was a partnership that worked. The investor partnership worked for a long time. We did a private equity transaction 4 years ago that retired that angel investor. We did buy out the Wichita entrepreneur. Vision was more about lifestyle business, I think, and in that product, we never really found TAM. We never really found a market for that product. So using online survey for culture assessment is what really ballooned for us, and so we bought in 2007.
Interesting. So I have to ask, when you're going out, you're starting to scale, hiring on employees. You yourself are doing analytics on essentially all of these metrics on company culture and finding the best people and keeping the best people. Did that help you kind of think through your own idea a bit and your own hiring process? Or
we're maniacal about it. We are our best users of our own software tool. I think I was talking to somebody at the opening about size. We sell primarily to mid-size or enterprise level customers, employers that have more than 500 people. That's when it starts getting hard. That's when it starts getting expensive and time intensive, as well as costly from when you mess up employee survey. When you take action on signal that's wrong, you create real problems, and you actually create dramas probably. So we sell primarily mid-market, but we've been using, even from the time we were 20 employees, heavy users of our own product. I'd have conversations with somebody giving me feedback, and I would love feedback, but I'd also make sure this is captured in the system, because we need this in the charting that we do for these engagement measures, for these trust measures. So it's part of who we are. It is through and through to us that feedback is a gift. good or bad. It was my wife's grandfather that told me 20 years ago, who he grew up in the pharmacy space, running retail pharmacies, and he said, if you're going to believe good feedback, which you always want to do, you also have to be willing to believe the bad feedback. So it is in our DNA that feedback is a gift, even when it tells you something that you don't want to hear or that you don't even agree with. That's part of our culture at Quantum.
Can you think of any of those early days and some of the feedback that might have been negative or that could have been substantially negative, where it's like, oh man, we're gonna have to change really big components of our offering?
Customer feedback, or intern or employee feedback.
Take it how you want.
Probably the thread of feedback that I started getting at some, still pretty early, maybe 20, 25 employees, so maybe 2 million in ARR, you start realizing that as much as I wanted to have this very flat organization, as much as I wanted to have all 25 of us report to me, that I reached a point of diminishing returns about the value that I was being able to offer 25 different direct reports. And so I would start hearing feedback like, hey, Greg, you're probably going to have to start building a management team and have people who are not just player coaches, but coaches. And that sounded like it was way too early for that. I didn't want to hear that. And I probably waited a really long time. There were still things that I wanted to do because we're maniacal about culture. I wanted to interview. I not only wanted to interview every candidate, I wanted to source most of our own candidates. I wanted not to be the last interview, that makes a decision between candidate A and candidate B. I wanted to be the recruiter interview. I wanted to be the 15 to 20 minute filter interview. And so it took a lot of it took multiple phases of employee feedback to probably wiggle some of those roles away from me. From a customer feedback perspective, the thread that we heard most in that first 5 years was about action. If I'm an HR director somewhere, I don't just want a big research project where we collect a bunch of data and then print out a bunch of reports. We talk about them one time and then we pick it up again 11, 12 months later. We want to create action. And that is why we exist today, because we built out a full suite, taking that feedback. It wasn't just about measuring. We talk about organizational fitness. Sometimes you want to be fit, you want to be healthy as an organization. It's not unlike individual fitness, personal fitness. I can get on the scale every single day of the year and know what I weigh and chart it. That doesn't necessarily make me more fit. That doesn't necessarily help me lose weight. It just makes me mad at myself every single day. It is a feedback loop, but it doesn't drive action. And so the customer feedback that we were getting those first 5 years was, help me figure out what I do with this. I haven't talked about this yet, but in 2004, we struck a deal with a network of media outlets. Most of them were weekly business journals. So here in Omaha, think of the Midlands Business Journal. There are weekly business publications like that in every major city. And we struck a deal with a network of them that had 45 of those papers. We started printing best places to work lists across the country. So we used our survey, our analytics. Today we run about 11 or 12,000 companies nationally through that program. If you read an Inc. magazine about the best places to work, that's our assessment that created, our technology that created that. Or in San Francisco or Atlanta or DC or Boston, those lists that are getting printed about the local best places to work, that's our list. It was through that data collection, all of a sudden we had a laboratory of employee engagement, employee psychology, employee effectiveness data that we were helping decide, okay, we're measuring this thing called employee engagement. We're helping organizations step on the scale. Now what action are we helping them develop? And that's what in probably 2010, 2011 set us on a course to broaden the product footprint and create more action-oriented. All of a sudden we have a digital one-on-ones product. We have a social recognition product. We have a continuous feedback product that managers are using to send out short-form surveys. Think SurveyMonkey. so that that data is sitting on the same survey as the larger census, the larger, more heavier data analytics survey that we think of when we think of an engagement survey.
Sure. The room is filled with early stage entrepreneurs, people that are curious about entrepreneurship. I got to ask, I hear this all the time, like you got to get in front of your customer, you need to be listening to customer feedback, that needs to direct your product. How did you position, other than this, this partnership to get all that data, how did you best position, Quantum Workplace or the people that work there to get that customer feedback?
I assume that several of the entrepreneurs in this room are SaaS or software-based survey. There's one thing worse than having a lot of tier 3 support tickets, and that's having no support requests at all. I mean, nobody's using your product. So, I wanted to see that data because I wanted to see volume. I wanted to see who it was coming in from. Was it coming in from our buyer, or was it coming from a person that's not even in our system? Is there a viral or a network effect in how the tools are getting used? So I didn't even have the technical skills to be able to help solve the problem. I could distribute that and I could point guard and kind of pass the ball around for that. But I wanted to see volume, I wanted to see who, and I wanted to see what. And I can't think of instances where I saw information that I didn't want to hear. What I do remember hating the most is when you launch a new feature and you have no support needs, because that tells me nobody's using it. We had a handful of those.
Sure.
And so we kind of gamified it. We kind of made it cool and made it look fun and asked them questions in a way that people would want to hear the answers to. And we actually almost made it like a report card. The report that gets generated feels like you're in college again, in high school, with A's and B's and C's. This was a phenomenal idea. This was a terrible idea. Nobody wanted it. We actually, speaking of, how do you, we were so scrappy at the time, we're so small at the time, we had no marketing budget to try to market this. We didn't buy space at a conference. We sent a person with a theater costume of Abraham Lincoln that we rented from some costume library in Benson here in Omaha. And his goal he was a visible leader as an Abraham Lincoln costume. I mean, if you ask 100 Americans who their favorite leader is in America, chances are a handful of, a large percentage of them would say Abraham Lincoln. So dressed this person, this unnamed individual who still happens to be on our executive team, dressed him up as Abraham Lincoln. He's getting handed, we just went guerrilla. We went rogue at this conference, having paid for no actual brand exposure. And I mean, it didn't sell. Nobody wanted it. Everybody hated it. It was the one product that we probably put the most thought into, that we developed, that we actually hired an external UX design firm to make this thing absolutely beautiful, because it was us trying to make a play on it, more of a direct to consumer, not a consumer product, but we wanted managers inside our customers to activate this on their own, and it wasn't complete. That was one of those instances where we hit send on a campaign, and I'm like, I'm just ready for this thing to light up, and crickets.
Oh man,
crickets.
Well, did you make a decision pretty quickly that we're going to shutter this and be done with it?
Yeah.
Good.
No. That would have been the wise thing to do. I was proud of this thing. And you can accuse me of a lot of things, but killing bad ideas too fast is the one thing you'll never be able to accuse me of. We probably let it ride and had expectations for it a little longer. I don't know if it's probably more than a year, maybe it was 18 months. We knew in month 3 that it was not going to meet the expectation that I had for it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
one of the
I got
more
sad all of a
difficult
sudden.
things. Yeah. I was gonna say, it's one of the more difficult things I feel in entrepreneurship is taking an idea, feeling the feedback, and then having to kill it. It's tough. It's extremely difficult. I want to shift gears a little bit. So, those were, kind of the early days as you're starting to grow and scale. I mean, early days, there's probably not a whole lot of social media marketing. I mean, there's pretty much nothing, right, at that time. How was this sales heavy? Were you going to a lot of conferences? Were there other ways other than this, this big partnership, that you were trying to get your name out there?
That was the biggest opportunity, the best places to work, having our name show up in these lists that would get printed in 45 different markets once a year was probably the most visible, the best visibility that we had. But our sales and marketing function, I mean, we're 20 years old now. We've mentioned that. We didn't really start trying to scale sales and marketing until probably 5 or 6 years ago. We existed on me selling until, probably for over 10 years of our history. But it was very relationship driven. It was very network driven, where we get one customer that's a mid-sized CPA firm, and they love us so much that we're able to draw some referrals. We went guerrilla. I mentioned Abraham Lincoln, which was a failed campaign. We had weird guerrilla tactics that did work, and I can describe them in a room like this with young people now, and it wouldn't make any sense at all. But we direct mail some crazy campaign out, and we would have some of those hit. But that was before, we were early on Google pay-per-click, which was a great source of leads for us in the early days. And we were also, because we were capturing so much data about the workplace, so much data that creates reports and insights that people like to read. People want to know, what are the 5 main reasons that people quit their job? What are the 5 things a manager can do to give feedback? What are the 5 things? We would use this data, we would write articles, we'd write blog posts, we'd write research pieces. And so we built this inbound content engine at a time 10 years ago, before every company started doing that, and built some reputation for subject matter expertise. And I would probably point to that even more so than search engine optimization or pay-per-click. It was the inbound, the content generation that was probably our most effective and most durable marketing system in our history.
That's a pretty astute insight early on to do these lists. I mean, they're fascinating. I'm definitely one of those people. I love going through, reading the list. What are the top, 5 things that you can do to succeed in this career, or to be a good employee. And now they're everywhere. Yeah. Literally every publication, it seems like, puts them out there. Every company does. So what do things look like? As you're starting to grow and scale, was there any other partnerships you can think of that were absolutely pivotal to success or to scale?
Partnerships, we've been very our growth has been very internal, very, we built a direct sales motion. We haven't relied on channel partners. I mentioned, we waited a long time. We waited 16 years to do our first institutional investment, and that's really gave us the capital and some of the expertise that we had to start figuring out how do we go from 2 salespeople to 20. And so I think of partnership, I think of probably some of that, been there, done that experience that we got through an institutional investor as a partner. But even then, we haven't, other than the media partnership, we have a couple other human capital consulting firms. We have a couple rewards and recognition companies that have created a survey product on our platform and branded it as their own. But channel partnerships is something that we haven't ever thrown a ton of resource at. We're actually just now kind of figuring out, there are other ways to build scale and to build volume, and who can we be pursuing for that now?
Sure. Was it a difficult decision to go and raise outside capital, or was it kind of a no-brainer to go where you wanted to go?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because I was really stubborn about it for a long time. I loved the fact that we controlled our own destiny. I was really proud of the fact that we were bootstrapped for so long. But there were instances where we were, some Bay Area company would go out and raise a ton of money, and all of a sudden, they would get in 2 years to the level of whether it's customer list or whether it's revenue that it took us 10 years to get. So you start having what I call capital envy, and this happened not 5 years, not 10 years in, because we came into the category competing with professional services firms. We were these nerdy research software developer people that were super focused in on human capital metrics. That wasn't a very sexy space 15 years ago. Somewhere along the line, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, HR technology or enterprise SaaS got cool, and all of a sudden it started attracting competition. And it probably wasn't until, even in the early cycle of that, I have to remind our team of this internally sometimes. To run a playbook, this is a very Midwestern, I'm going to identify myself as a tried and true Midwesterner as I describe this, but my approach to capital was stubbornly bootstrapped. And that idea was affirmed earlier in our history by companies that tried to chase us in the early years, went out and raised money, and then completely pooped a bit, and completely floundered later. It was a playbook that I just wasn't sure worked in every software category or every category to begin with. So your question was it obvious to raise when we raised? I don't think it was. It became a practical matter. I had a shareholder that was 75 years old, had living a retired lifestyle, but living on the beach, and had built a tremendous amount of, he put us on the map, he got us off the ground, and he deserved, a liquidity event that would reward him for that patience and that wisdom. So there's a very, very practical need that we had, which had us thinking this might be the time to do something. But that happened to be at a time when getting capital, attracting institutional investor for enterprise SaaS was a pretty easy thing to do. And then it became who and what and how and what might it look like and what would the strategy be going forward. Those are actually much more complex selection decisions to make.
Awesome. So one last question. When you look forward to the future, what are you most excited about? Is there any technologies, new age technologies maybe that excite you or that you're kind of thinking about or toying around with?
I'm excited about the digitization. I'm excited. It might be the acceptance of very non-technical things that seem to be becoming more common sense. I'm more excited about that than I am the technologies themselves, because the technologies will only support the human interactions that we're having. Today we understand better than we did 5 years ago that how we communicate matters, that how we include people in meetings matters, that the neuroscience involved in building trust isn't about the stick as much as it is about the carrot. There's stuff that we know about psychology and neuroscience today that we didn't know 10 or 20 years ago, and we were able to build the tooling, the digital tooling. So it's the human, the fact that we are building technology to support human interaction is more interesting to me than probably our model for building technology 20 years ago, which was kind of vice versa. I'm going to build something and ask a bunch of people to use it. So I'm excited about the fact that workplaces are having to think about the dynamics that create effective culture, and that is most companies today. That to me is exciting. And the fact that we are a leader in a category that people didn't know was a category 20 years ago, and that we are still in the second or third inning of this long game, that to me is super. I'm a durable grower. I think in terms of decades, and so I'm still pumped about that. I still have a lot of energy every morning about it.
Fantastic. Well, I want to open it up for questions. I'm sure there are some questions out there. Levi, I saw your hand go up.
2 questions. One's a quick one. Do you have a favorite personality assessment for the workplace? And then the second one is, I love hearing about the hard moments and the challenging stories. So, what's your number 1 oh shit moment for your company and how you pull through?
Easy question.
Yeeks. The first question, let's take the first one. I threw some shade earlier about a company. Let me do the reverse of that. And I don't know that they would call it a personality assessment, but it's my favorite psychometric assessment is StrengthsFinder.
Cool.
I think that is a game-changing innovation. I think it can change the world. I think it's the most brilliant thing that the founding company of that created. The idea that we are telling all humans, young, old, that we have strengths, that we have inherent talents, and that focusing on our talents and building those things will take a person farther and activate more talent than having everybody fix their weaknesses is a revolutionary concept. So StrengthsFinder is my favorite, and probably the only one that we use internally ourselves as a company. But that's my answer to that. Poop moments. We've always had a diverse number of customers. We've never had customer concentration, so we've never had that poop moment with like, oh my goodness, ABC client is going to churn. What are we going to do? We did have a moment in 2008, a financial crisis where here we are 5 years, and because we focused on profitability early, we hit, we didn't worry about payroll often. Financial crisis 2008 hits. We had our first OPU moment. We just come off a hiring phase. Probably what a lot of startups, well-funded startups, are experiencing right now, where they went from 100 people to 300 people. They raised capital, but all of a sudden they're being asked to become profitable, and they were, that in their mind was 5 or 10 years down the road.
Any other questions out there?
So, based on your 20 plus years of experience in this field, what would you say is the most effective way to recruit and maintain good employees?
That's $1 million question. We talk a lot about culture. We talk a lot about good culture and bad culture, and that's a little bit of a misnomer. Culture is more about matching expectation with reality. It's more about a company figuring out what they love, what they believe, how they want to make decisions, and how are they able to tell that story to potential employees. And when they tell that story and the potential employees become real employees, does it match? Do those two things match? Culture is to internal what brand is to market. Are the attributes that McDonald's describes their product at, are they real? So getting out of the mindset that says there are good cultures and bad cultures is step number one into attracting and retaining talent. Being very good about articulating what makes your culture unique and finding people that match those cultural elements. Especially in software world, we want 1 million different backgrounds, 1 million different types of people, 1 million different thinkers. We want this rich diversity of people, but there's something we don't want any diversity on, and that is those 4 core values. We didn't want 5, we didn't want 10, we wanted 4 core values. And so that's how we recruit people, and our ability to stay consistent with those 4 things over time is what I point to is why it's worked for us, and what I tell our customers how to think about how to operate. So it's more evaluative than it is scoring culture. If you're Goldman Sachs, you want to be a cutthroat, competitive culture. And there are a lot of people that would really hate that. But the people that love it would hate to go to any culture that didn't have that hard, dry, cutthroat element of their culture. So consistency of values is the biggest thing.
Have you found with your clients, were they already gathering feedback? They had an interest, they just wanted a more streamlined way or a different way of doing that? Or was gathering feedback like in the new concept altogether?
Good thought. Earlier on, we were educating workplaces to do this for the very first time. 10 years passed, and all of a sudden, most people were doing it. They were doing it with something. Maybe they were hiring an outsourced consultant to help them run some interviews. Maybe they were doing something with some, like a SurveyMonkey type survey. So in the very early days, we were educating people to do something for the very first time. middle of our lifespan was they're already doing something, but they're doing something on their own and they're spending a tremendous amount of hours doing it. Today, with what probably most SaaS categories feel a little crowded. Now, we're not marketing tech, we're the landscape, and there's so many people crowded into MarTech, you can't even see the logos. We're not that crowded, but we have 10, 12 legit competitors in our category. So today, it's differentiation is more about not just do you have the capability to collect this data, it's are you using it to tell an intelligent story? Is it actually pushing insight to me, or do I have to go forage for it? And is it helping me get one step closer to action? That's what our customers do better on our platform than they will if they use culture and Lattice.
Good one. How'd you come up with the name Quantum Workplace?
Our very first name out of the gate was Quantum Market Research. I had this workplace concept. I mentioned my partner had this marketplace, market research type concept. We thought that kind of merged both worlds. 2007, we bought him out. We shuttered that market research, customer research product line. We wanted to do a rebrand. We hired a firm here in town to help us through that creative process. We totally blank slated it. We were open to any name. My favorite name did not pass the four voting members we had of our brand committee at that time. That was Work Squirrel.
Work Squirrel.
Yeah, it's my favorite name. A little bit of me thinks we missed it. So we went through this start from scratch process to think about name and think about it with a new lens. What we did is we fell back in love with the name Quantum. I mean, Quantum at its core means the basic elements, taking something very complex and the quantum mechanics of something means the analysis of what is core. We fell back in love with that name Quantum. Then we just had to put something to it so somebody didn't think we were the big storage disk drive maker that even has a cube kind of like ours. That was 2007. And we've been with Quantum Workplace. It has more characters than your perfect URL had, but we thought it told our story pretty well.
I feel like Work Squirrel might rank up there with the Abraham Lincoln.
Brilliant. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, brilliant. Any other questions out there?
I hope none of our 148 people will hear me talking about Work Squirrel because there'll be people rolling their eyes in a very heavy way if this video gets out.
Anything else out there?
I've got one question. Because you mentioned for a while you were trying to stay really close to a lot of the processes of the company, and then you kind of hit that point where it's like, okay, we got to have a management team. I got to start doing more CEO focused stuff. But I'm curious, when did you really ramp up the sales process? Because for a while, I think you said that it was mostly kind of you being more tactical about it. So now is it more inbound versus outbound? What does that look like? And what was that pivotal moment of oh shoot, we should probably build out a sales team?
Yeah. That decision comes pretty easy for us. The when, if part of the question is when, it happened when the content that we were writing in that inbound engine started actually generating more links. When we were getting more research downloads than a single person could call in a day, that's when we know we can hire a salesperson. And I actually like sales. I thought I was pretty decent at it. And so I wanted to be in that role. I went from selling it still and then to leading one or two sales reps. So really it was a lead volume. We never really got great at the crazy cold calling campaigns, the crazy guerrilla marketing campaigns. But the content marketing was working. But the content marketing, you do still have to kiss a lot of frogs. At 100 calls, you're going to have 18 or 20 that legitimately got to that piece of research through a Google thread that meant they are going to be in a shopping posture sometime in the next 6 months. So it was really about volume of leads that drove the decision of when to hire your first rep, and then the next big decision was, when do we hire a sales leader, and do you promote your best producing seller into that leadership role, or do you do what almost all CEOs make the mistake of doing, and that is promoting your top producer into a sales leadership role. But it was lead volume that generated that, and then that 2 or 3 or 4 person sales function, which it's been for 6 or 7 years. It was about a year and a half ago, and we said it's time.
What's Quantum doing to retain top talent within the Omaha greater Midwest area? I'm from the age where it's like, and you guys probably relate, like your college friends graduate, they go to Chicago, right? They go to Seattle, they go work for the cool places.
Yeah.
And I'm now seeing my generation come back and realize the Midwest values, but like, what are you guys doing to maybe mitigate and compete against the people down the river or the other larger?
We are the cool place.
Yeah.
We just be cool. It's the ping pong bear.
We have a person that was not an entry level role for us, but it was her first professional gig. So she probably came to us at maybe 24, was with us in the Omaha office for 3 or 4 years. Husband does a grad school program in Germany, and all of a sudden she went from Nebraska to Germany to Oklahoma to rural Nebraska, and now she's in Colorado. When we find good talent, we actually, I still love to yak it up. I still love having people in the office, but I had to recognize in this remote question that you asked, we want great people more than we want great people in Omaha. So that is the cool thing about the Midwest. I think this is what your question is getting at. Life brings people back to Nebraska, and we just want to make sure that we're not doing anything to send people out. But we have people that we hired outside of the state that are now in Nebraska. But location is a secondary metric for us right now. We still want to create a tremendous amount of value in Nebraska. We still want Omaha. We want Quantum Workplace to be known in Omaha. We identify as part of the technology fabric of Omaha. But if you ask, is 60% of your people, would you rather it be 70% or 80%? If I said yes to that, it would be simply personal preference.
Yeah, I always like to hear what's keeping or what employers are doing to retain talent, because I work in an industry that's relatively old, and it's culture, like you said, meeting those expectations. It's not so much like the ping pong table, right? In the kegerator, it's managing expectations.
Yeah.
And you can do that, I think, here
without
maybe some of the flair that you get in the valley or other places.
So what we've decided to optimize for is optimize for keeping people, not necessarily keeping people in Nebraska. I think the people that are in the office that are in Nebraska, probably employee experience is probably going to be better. It's more fun, but I don't have to be the judge of that either. So we optimize for keeping people in the role, and creating careers that are continually energizing and engaging, more so than we think about where they are.
What's been the biggest shift in the types of services your clients are requesting since the pandemic began?
So our clients will use our survey platform to run not just their big engagement survey, but 360s, topical surveys. It could be, hey, I'm going to ask 3 questions about yesterday's all hands meeting. How to go? What should we change about this? So it's all kinds of feedback that's being captured. D&I is being asked about in a way in the last 3 years more than it ever has before. In the HR suite, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, D&I was its own thing. I think I would describe it as that. In the last 2 to 3 years, it has elevated from we have somebody to help us think about this and run some reports to this is actually being impacted. We are shaping how we talk about culture and how we run meetings based on this thing. So it's elevated to an HR leadership role. That's one of the biggest changes. And all of a sudden companies are asking a lot of questions about inclusion, about belonging, so that what we're measuring, what we're holding managers accountable for has changed a little bit.
Could you explain a little bit what D&I is referring to?
Diversity and inclusion.
Oh.
Diversity, equity, inclusion. Do all people feel like belonging, like they belong in a culture?
Do you capture any data like internally, not with software? Like any other methods that you use?
We have a digital one-on-one product that helps a manager and employee, if they have like a monthly cadence of one-on-ones or a weekly cadence, it helps them prepare an agenda, it helps them share that agenda and kind of comment on it or ask for clarity before the one-on-one happens. But it really is set up to prepare for and document a face-to-face or a Zoom meeting, a real conversation. That creates data that then can be searched with natural language processing or that can be scored. But that's probably the closest tool that we have in our platform that is a digital something that facilitates a non-digital interaction. We don't do focus groups, and there are other kinds of researchy types of data things. We will recommend focus groups to help chew on insights that are foraged from a survey type data collection, but our product doesn't necessarily facilitate that.
Excellent. All right, one last question.
Yeah.
We always ask, the last question is, what can the entrepreneurial community do to help you?
This community can build, and this isn't for me so much as the vision that I want for the startup and the entrepreneurial community. This community can prioritize culture and recognize that culture starts when you have 2 employees. It doesn't start when you get to 150. You'll start buying culture products like ours when you get bigger. But the decisions, culture is not just ping pongs. There are artifacts of culture, which are ping pong tables and kegerators. But there's actual culture, which is how do we make decisions? How do we hire? How do we promote? How do we fire? How do we communicate? How do we set expectations? That's what culture is. And so this community, as they're forming entities, can recognize that the more proactive you are, the earlier about that. Again, I'll go back to the fitness. The earlier in your life you decide that diet and exercise matters, the more fit you're going to be, the more thankful you'll be when you're 50. I would say the same thing about culture. I know entrepreneurs that got to 200 employees that wished and realized how hard it is to turn culture when you have the complexity and the size of a large organization, and they want to go back. They almost have to sell that and start a new thing so that they can prioritize culture. That would be my answer to that.
Excellent. Well, can we get a round of applause for graduating?